Hi, students and families. Welcome to Processing Protest Against Racism. I'm Ms. Jarmon.
And I'm Ms. Troyer. We'll be discussing a challenging topic that's really important, and we're so glad you're here with us. Let's get started.
So, this is a complicated issue, but we felt it was important to quickly touch on what racism is and isn't. So, racism is when a group or groups of people are judged or treated negatively based on their perceived race or ethnicity. And the important part of that is perceived. So even if you identify as a certain race, if others view you as a different race, you can be treated differently than the one you actually are.
Yep, on the other hand, racism isn't talking about race. Sometimes in school, we hear students throwing out that word racist at the mere mention of someone's race. This is counterproductive. We need to be able to talk about race in a positive, productive way so that we can learn and grow as human beings.
So, we're going to start with our personal perspectives on protest against racism. We know that we're asking you to think about these topics, so we wanted to start with where we're coming from. So, for those of you that don't know, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. Now, Chicago is huge. To give you an idea, the population of Seattle is around 700,000, while Chicago has a population of 2,700,000. It's a very diverse city, but it's very segregated. So this means that you probably live around people who look like you, but travel and interact with all sorts of people. So my first experience with racism was in kindergarten. My brother and I were called names walking home from school. People would spray paint things on the side of our school building. So sometimes we couldn't go outside for recess, stuff like that. I say that because I know for some people this isn't something that they are familiar with, but for me, racism has just been a part of my entire life. So when I see the protests going on around the country and in my hometown, I understand the anger and frustration and how long people have felt that way.
And so my perspective is really different. I'm not sure if you noticed, but I'm white. Being white has allowed me to be ignorant at times of daily injustices that people of color face. Being white in our country is often seen as normal or raceless. That can make people of color feel not normal and like they always stand out. They might feel prejudged or stereotyped before people even get to know them. This is one of the privileges of being white. I can walk into any store in Olympia and just blend in. People of color don't have that privilege. In addition, there are many societal injustices that oppress people of color. It's harder to get quality, high-paying jobs, quality education, and healthcare if you're a person of color. In addition, African Americans are more likely to be arrested and punished more harshly for the same crimes committed by white people. This is the reason for the Black Lives Matter movement. George Floyd was an African American man who was killed by police on May 25th for possibly using counterfeit money. His death was just the most recent example of an African American person killed by police for a minor crime. You might be thinking, how does this affect me? I'll tell you how it affects me. I think about how my students and loved ones who are people of color, and I worry about them feeling safe and being able to access the education and jobs they want. More simply, I want my friends and students to be able to follow their dreams, to find themselves, to feel valued and respected, and not be prejudged or even harmed because of their race.
So now we're going to segue into what's happening and why. So those are the two questions we're going to focus on this slide. So what is happening? We'll start there. So protests are happening all around the country against police brutality and racism towards African Americans and people of color.
Yep, and now the why. So we think that there are multiple reasons why. It's a really complicated issue, but here were the top 4 that we wanted to talk about. The first one is police brutality. George Floyd was just the most recent example of this. He was accused, not found guilty, but accused, of using counterfeit or fake money, and he died during the police encounter. There are many other recent examples of African Americans and people of color dying in police custody, and many feel that their alleged crimes did not justify the action of police in those situations.
The second reason that has brought people out to protest is the disproportionate effect COVID-19 has had on communities of color. In some states, people of color are twice as likely as whites to die from COVID-19. Now, this is due to several factors. First, not having nearby access to healthcare. For some of our indigenous or Native American populations, they may live really far from a hospital. So even if they get sick, it takes them a long time to get to help. Not having insurance, so you can't afford to go to the doctor. Some families feel like going to the doctor is too expensive, and so they wait until it's too late to go. Hospitals in areas with a lot of people of color don't have the same resources. Sometimes they don't have as many resources as hospitals in areas that are predominantly white. And in addition, studies have shown that medical professionals don't treat people of color's pain symptoms as seriously as white people with the same health conditions.
A third topic that people are protesting about is a big one, systemic racism. And this is the idea that racism is built into our society and country, starting all the way back to the land, which was taken from Native Americans who were here for thousands of years. And so we wanted to show you a video that shows the impacts of systemic racism.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin, who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents. Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny black people loans and other services based purely on race. Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have. Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the only student from his high school to get accepted into a great university, the same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies show that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with black-sounding names. Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment, even among college graduates today. You can see evidence of systemic racism in every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases. What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start so that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace.
So that was a great video kind of outlining systemic racism, which we've highlighted as one of the issues that's bringing people out to protest. Beyond that, the last one we'll talk about is history repeats itself. So these injustices towards people of color have been happening for a long time, and people are frustrated that in 2020 they're still happening. Many people feel like people with the most power in society haven't been listening because they benefit from things staying the same. All of these issues and more are what are bringing people out to protest.
So we've all heard of some problems related to the protests. So we're just wanting to talk about them a little bit.
So one of the major ones is why some of the protests have turned violent. So we're going to go through 4 reasons why some of the protests have turned violent. The first is people feel like their voices have not been heard from less extreme forms of protest. So throughout the years, we've seen other types of protest, and when no change happens, people get more and more frustrated. And that's one thing that you are seeing.
Yeah, and so along with that, the violence is really an expression of anger and hurt felt in the community. Think about when you've been really hurt or angry or felt hopeless, like no one's listening. You react with the emotional flight or fight part of your brain.
We also want to acknowledge that there are some people who aren't interested in the topics we discussed previously at all and are taking advantage of the situation to harm others. They know that they can kind of hide out in a crowd, and so they're taking advantage of that to do bad things.
Yep, exactly. And the protests show the whole range of human responses in times of crisis. So it's important to remember that most people, their responses have been helpful. People volunteering, people from all different races and ethnicities coming together to protest, people handing out water and food and masks. And so we'd like to remember that it's only a small group of people who have responded harmfully with violence and damage.
So we're going to move on to some discussion topics that we asked students to reflect on. Feel free to pause the video and discuss these questions with your family or friends.
Yep. So the first question that we wanted students to reflect about is, what race or ethnicity do you identify with? And then the follow-up to that is, how has your race, ethnicity impacted your life? If it has impacted your life. If not, then that's something to reflect about as well.
Question number 3 is, how have the protests impacted you? We feel like for a lot of people that was a really good thing to think about, not only viewing the images on social media or the TV or however you're getting your information, but turning it more towards a personal level. And then what questions or comments do you have or would you like to ask either myself, Ms. Troyer, or your peers?
Nice. So now focusing on some positives. What can you do to help out? The first idea that we came up with is that you can volunteer for social justice organizations when it's safe to do so. And another thing that's not on here, but if you can't physically volunteer, you could donate to social justice organizations or ask adults in your life if they are willing to donate.
You can ask your family if you can go old school and write a letter, or keep it 2020 and send an email to a local, state, or federal representative about a social justice topic. Pick one that's important to you and tell them why it's important. What do you think can be done about it? Because the reality is, sometimes adults listen better to kids than they do to other adults. And we all really want the world to be better for you guys. So sometimes it's really powerful when kids say, this is what I think is wrong in the world, and this is how I think that things should go, or how things should change. And sometimes adults listen better. So harness that power you have.
Yeah, exactly. You can use social media to support each other and make sure that you're not bringing each other down on social media. Think about how it's possible to reach millions of people with your message. Think about how many views some TikToks that you've seen have gotten. It's millions. So, yeah, using social media to expand your community, because our community is our strength.
Absolutely. When you do see images or media, try and view the topic from another point of view. Stop and think about, what was that person feeling? Why were they feeling that way? What was happening right before the image or the video started? Understanding others' feelings and opinions, even if you don't agree, is the first step to finding a solution. Now, as you're trying to view topics from all the perspectives, if you do research and come across graphic images or videos, please ask an adult before viewing it. And if you accidentally see graphic images or videos, please check in with an adult.
Check in with friends and people of color in your community. Let them know you appreciate them, you hope they're okay, and you're a support to them if needed. Feeling loved, cared about, and heard can heal a lot of wounds.
Be self-reflective about your own biases and prejudgments. A lot of people, and it's totally natural to have kind of a knee-jerk reaction, an instant reaction to something or someone, but pausing when you do and really figuring out, why did you feel that way, or why were you thinking that, is the first step in changing your beliefs and your judgments.
Yeah, really important. And then our last thought is that you can read books, watch videos told from the perspectives of people from different backgrounds as you. Sometimes we're all part of this Olympia bubble where we haven't really had exposure to people from all different types of groups, ethnic and racial groups. And so reading books is a great way to reach out of your bubble and bring new knowledge and new information and new experiences to yourself. We have a lot to learn from each other.
And who doesn't want a new author to read, right? So, final thoughts. First of all, we wanted to leave you with a little quote by Jason Reynolds. Now, he's awesome. So, going right back to Ms. Schroyer's last point about maybe reading some different perspectives, he wrote American Boys, Stamp, The New Spider-Man, Miles Morales, and a bunch of other books. So he's a great author to check out. When he was asked, what can people and kids do to make the world a better place, this is what he said. He said, a person should ask themselves, what can I do every day to make one person's life a little better, a little more equal, a little more just, a little more fair? So thank you for coming and talking about a difficult topic with us. We hope that you'll continue the discussions beyond this as we all work towards a more just society.
And my final thoughts are, so fixing racism in our society is mostly on the shoulders of white people like me. People of color didn't create racism. White people did. As a white person, it's really important that I'm constantly self-reflecting about my own biases and behaviors. When I feel myself prejudging someone based on how they look, I need to notice my bias. I need to be vigilant. I need to watch out for people of color in my life and be a good ally and friend. I need to use my privilege for good and not pretend like I earned it, it is owed to me, or it doesn't exist. No one is perfect, and we've all made mistakes and had judgments and biases. What matters is that you work to change your perspectives around those judgments and biases. If you ever find yourself lumping people into groups and thinking, all people of a certain race or ethnicity are like blank, you're probably having a racist thought. Ask yourself, is it possible for all of the people in a racial or ethnic group to be the same? Are all the people in my racial and ethnic group the same? Of course not. It's very hard to not be defensive if someone tells you you made a racist comment. I'm not racist. I have a friend from a different racial group. Sometimes our defensiveness prevents us from getting the message and learning and growing. Everyone needs to work on noticing their biases and prejudgments. The work is not done because you've made a friend from a different racial or ethnic group, even though that is a very good idea for you to have friends from different backgrounds. We can always be better, and we have to work on it, just like any other skill we want to achieve. We can't afford to say, other people will figure this racism stuff out. It's up to us. Actual lives depend on it. And with that, thank you so much for joining us and doing this work. It's really, really important to us. And please let us know if you have any feedback or questions, or you want to tell us some ideas that you've had for how we can help.
Absolutely. And don't forget, just because summer's coming up doesn't mean Miss Shore and I go away. Email us. We will still check. Yep. So if anything comes up over the summer, good, bad, or just crazy, let us know.
Yep, please do. All right. Thank you.